welcome everyone to another episode of Paperboy Ventures. We have a special one today as we're joined by Caroline Levy, who is a legend in the beverage industry. Caroline, welcome, welcome.
Thank you, Kyle. I'm so happy to be here.
Yes, we're thrilled to have you, and we're here today to talk about your experiences, what you're working on currently, which is very impressive, and a little bit about how you got here, because I know that becoming a board member is sort of this North Star for a lot of people in the CPG space, and I think there's nobody better to speak to that than you in the beverage space. So appreciate you coming on, and I love your podcast, which is called Drinks with Caroline. So if anybody out there wants to go check that out, I'd highly recommend it. And we're going to start with a very relevant question related to that. What are you drinking today?
Oh, I must admit, I am literally addicted to this is Sybil Coffee, is a little coffee shop in my neighborhood, and it is the best coffee I've ever had, and it's an oat milk latte. And I've been told by my health and wellness specialist to cut the oat milk daily coffee, and I just can't. I love it so much. But over the course of a day, I'll have a non-alc athletic beer, and of course a little Celsius and a Health-Ade. I am very loyal to my brands.
Oh, why those three brands? That's
I
interesting. You bring
wonder.
those
I
up,
wonder. Yeah.
but nice to have a civil reference there. So maybe some ad dollars coming to Paperboy soon. Thank you, Civil. But yeah, let's get into what you're working on now. I think that's a good place to start, and then we'll go into your background and how you got there. But can you
Sure.
just talk to us about your current roles?
Right. So 5 years ago, right around the time of COVID, I left Wall Street, which I'd had a career there for 35 years. Nobody should have a career that long on Wall Street. It's grueling. And I thought, I really want to be on a board. It wasn't an initial thought. I'd been thinking about this for a long time. And I thought, what do 35 years of experience of talking to the best and brightest in the world of consumer, meaning CEOs and CFOs and CMOs and everybody you get exposed to as an analyst, and touring the world, touring bottling plants and beer manufacturing facilities literally across the world, and walking streets with Coke bottlers from anywhere from Italy to Spain to South America. What does this make you equipped to do? And I thought it would be amazing to take that knowledge and be on a beverage board. I have to admit that is not a traditional trajectory
Right.
for a stock analyst.
It's not, and I think you might be the only one. I don't know the rosters as well as you do, but can you clarify? So which brands are you a board member at today?
So I have the great privilege of serving on the board of Celsius Holdings, which is the large energy company, and we just bought Alani Nu. So around 2 billion in sales, a little more than that. And it's had explosive growth over the last 5 years. So I've been privileged to watch that happen. And Health-Ade Kombucha, which is owned by two major PE firms, and Athletic Brewing Company, founded by Bill Schufelt, and his co-founder is a brilliant brewer, and it's privately held, and is now the number one non-alc beer brand in the United States in the space of about 6 years.
Right. It's an incredible trio of brands to be a part of. And Athletic is right down the street for me here in Connecticut, so that one's pretty close to my heart. But it's amazing that you've landed roles at all three of these places. And has that happened recently? Is that the past few years that you've gotten each one of those?
Yeah, so the first was 5 years ago. And I think this is an interesting story because I'm part of a group called Extraordinary Women on Boards. They're over 1,000 people. And even within there, people will say, how do you get on a board? And the traditional thinking might be through a headhunter. But I really, really believe it's through relationships. And the way I got my first board was saying to John Fieldley, who's the CEO of Celsius and has been responsible for the incredible hyperbolic growth that we've seen in the past decade. I said, I'm looking for a board position. If you know of anything, let me know. And simply saying that, they needed somebody. And then it turned out I knew Hal Kravitz, who's been on that board longer than I have, from days of walking the streets when he was running a Coke region. And I took some clients to visit him. So I think the best board members are people that management can trust and has known for a long time, but also have independent thinking. So
Right.
it can't be your best friend. It's someone who will speak truth. But I was, just amazed that it didn't come through her headhunter. It came through asking. And I think one has to put yourself out there and just say, this is my interest. Know what it is you want and ask. And that those long-term relationships, I think, are the best way to enter the boardroom.
Right. And there's a lot of power to just speaking publicly about what you want, which is awesome to hear that that's what got you there. But I think that's the final action, right? That's sort of the thing that just landed the role, but it's really all of the prep work and the relationship and the knowledge that you built up over your 35 years on Wall Street that made you qualified to get to that
Yeah,
position.
I also would say I think John understood that I understood that Celsius was something special. So while it was a very low priced stock, well below $10, they would visit me in New York. I always took the meeting. I was like, this is a great brand. I like the story. I like the story. This is interesting. I tried to pick up coverage, and the firm I was with at the time said, oh, no, there's not enough trading volume. I'm like, it's not about the trading volume. It's about making our clients money. But, I think he knew that I got it and I understood what was possible. So I think that was something talking to your point about relationships.
Yeah, and on your time on Wall Street when you're mostly working as an analyst, and I'd love to hear you speak to kind of your progression there and the key skills that you learned there that help you evaluate consumer businesses now.
Right. Just for fun, I'm going to tell you that when I came to New York, age 23, I had a degree in accounting and economics, but I'd all my life really wanted to be on stage and be a dancer and an actress. And so that wasn't happening. And I'd spent a year on the buy side, the investment side in South Africa, came to New York on holiday and fell madly in love with Manhattan and somehow landed a job as the full on restaurant and lodging analyst at what was then EF Hutton, became Lehman. So I just put that out there because my life has had unexpected turns. And I think that there are people who plot out their future. And in fact, I had Nick Modi on my podcast, and he's a very methodical plotter.
Hmm.
I kind of go on intuition quite a lot, and I think that relates to the way that I was an analyst and how I think about the boardroom as well. So I think it's educated intuition. But anyway, so I get this job on Wall Street, and I'm in shock. I don't even realize I've gone from the buy side to the sell side, which means I have a huge marketing role in front of me, tons of travel. I get there, and over the years I've covered many, many, consumer companies. And I think the skill set is an interesting one because if you look at there are 30 analysts covering Coke, let's say,
Yep.
which was one of my companies. What makes you better than anyone else? It's not going to be your modeling skills. That's like a basic requirement. And over time, as a senior analyst, you actually have a team who'll do that for you. But it is your relationships. And I think the relationships are not, are you best friends with someone in senior management? There, can you read the room? So it's that it goes back to an intuition informed by understanding and listening and watching people. And I think that's a skill that translates across boardrooms and running companies and everywhere.
Yeah, and it sounds like you built up the analytical skills and you have that as a box to check, and that's something that you can fall back on. But more or less there's a lot of people that can do that, and that's sort of a common requirement when you're an analyst. The intuition side, the relationship side, is what you're pairing with that, which makes you particularly dangerous and effective in the world of beverage boards. Is
And
that right?
annoying in a boardroom, I will tell you as well. But
Yeah.
but all that being said, let's go back to the modeling. I actually find that really being close to the model, which means having an understanding of what the past 5 years have looked like for this company on a quarterly basis or on an annual basis, and forecasting the next 3 years and more long term. That process of going through that activity, that incredibly detailed from volume growth to pricing to revenue to gross margins, expenses, all the way down to the bottom, and thinking about cash flows and the capital needs makes you a good analyst because it sets you up. You have to ask questions to be able to build that model. So, in fact, Modeling is it is absolutely the backbone of what you do. Once you've got that in place, then I call it catching the baby every time they report earnings. Oh, what does it look like? Is it pretty? Is it as expected? Girl, boy, what did we get? That's very important in measuring the performance of what's expected versus what actually happens, or what happens versus what's actually expected. But then the intuition, I think, comes in when you're building the forward model and you're talking to management and you're talking to outsiders. I mean, Drinks with Caroline came along because I would bring in industry experts, but not corporates, who would actually tell you what was going on in the industry, what the distributors were saying, what retailers were saying, so on. You incorporate all that to build your model. And that's, I think, how you get to the most accurate earnings and cash flow and can really say the stock will work or won't.
Makes sense, and I've never heard the term "catching the baby" referring to an earnings call, so that's a new one for me. But I'll say that's pretty well
It's
said.
it's personal.
Sure. And when you joined the Celsius board, you said that you asked John was looking for. It sounds like somebody with your type of skill set. So was that what he was looking for? He was looking for like an analyst modeling type, metrics based person. Like, could you talk about like why you were a fit for that?
I don't actually think so. I think that he thought my understanding of the investment community would be helpful as they tried to raise their profile. Again, the stock was, by the time I joined the board, it was about $15, but it had very recently been $6 and it had been public for a long time. So
Yeah.
I think that he understood that getting his message across and the potential of this company across to Wall Street was important. So I think there was that. I think my knowledge of the beverage industry, and I think I checked out with the people he knew that this is somebody who could be, a good board member in all that took. And again, I'm not so sure. There are moments where he wished he hadn't put me on the board because I'm very opinionated, and that's part of being an analyst is you call things as you see it. But that's, I think, exactly what a CEO tends to want, really want underneath it all from a board member. Truth sayers.
Right, because most people in that person's universe aren't gonna do that. So if your board can't do that, I think you're in a tough
Yeah.
spot as a business.
Yeah. So I would say I think the analytical training is good for being on the audit committee, but it's not as good as being a CFO at a real company. I think you can add even more value that way. But the industry knowledge, the experience of what's worked and what hasn't worked over 30 years in consumer, the understanding of how investors think about things, those I think are valuable, but a very holistic approach.
Sure. And I know now you're on three beverage boards. Were you always into beverage as like your favorite CPG category? Because I think you did some other stuff as well, like household products and
Yeah.
everything. So like
I got,
why
yeah.
beverage?
I've covered beverage the longest, but I did start as a restaurant analyst. And, I look at a company like Carver with great admiration and think, that would be something I'd love to go back to because that really was my first world. I was ranked as an institutional all-star in restaurants. That was my thing. And then I sat next to the person who covered Pepsi and Coke, and I'm like, oh, those are such big, fabulous global companies. That looks fun. And when they left, I took those over. And anyway, it just, my career evolved. But the other industry that I know very well is cosmetics, having covered Estee Lauder when it owned 35 brands and was operating globally. And so those are my three loves, I would say: beverage, restaurants, and cosmetics.
And maybe performing and acting once you're done with all of this stuff and go
Well,
back to
here's the thing: life is funny because part of being a sell side analyst, and a sell side analyst means you work for a brokerage firm as opposed to an investment house where you're actually doing the buying and selling. We're in the world of making recommendations and trying to be popular enough that people will let you into their office. I think that acting and performing is a big part of what a sell side analyst does. So it all comes full circle.
yeah, it does. So cool to hear about, and would love to get to up to the point where you join the Celsius board. And I think you said was it 2020 when you
Yes,
first came on.
yes.
So, can you talk about kind of what the makeup was of the board at the time and what your specific role was in coming on and joining? And really the piece to think about here is, with people that are listening to this and angling and trying to figure out how to get to that point to get to a place of strategic value for a company. So would love to hear your story about that and why that worked.
Yeah, I mean, Celsius had been owned largely by two large families, and over time, the Hong Kong based company has lowered their stake. So has the Florida based ownership gone down. But essentially, the board has shifted, certainly more female, which has been fantastic. I have two fellow board members who are just outstanding at what they do. And in each, Cheryl was actually the CFO of a very large public company and has been a CEO as well, and chairs the audit committee and is brilliant. And Joyce comes out of the world of Adecco, which is staffing, and obviously hugely valuable on the compensation committee. And some of the board members have been with the on the board a long time. Hal Kravitz, for example, our lead independent director, endless industry experience, having been a long-time Coke veteran. What I think is an interesting conversation is what needs to shift going forward and where the opportunities lie. And there are two areas that I see of growing importance, maybe very related, but marketing. For a consumer branded company, I think having somebody who's expert at marketing in two ways is very, very valuable. One is understanding how data driven that business is and how to get the best data on a very current basis. And that would actually tie into AI and all the opportunities developing there.
Mhm.
But then also somebody really who understands the youth. So, shocking thought, but should we perhaps have someone under 35 on the board who can really talk to what it means to be a young consumer today, what Gen Z is going through? Maybe we need them to be 25, or whether they're actually on the board. Should we have an advisory council made up of people who are really close to what consumers are thinking about and feeling and wanting right now?
I totally agree with that. I think that's a smart move. The funniest thing and I work with brands all the time, everybody's obsessed with capturing Gen Z, but it's a bunch of 35 to 50-year-olds sitting around a conference table trying to understand how TikTok works. So it definitely is something that I think is necessary if you're trying to build a business with longevity and actually capture, those consumers at an early age. But yeah, I'm sure that would be up your alley and how you think about women on boards, younger people on boards. There needs to be more representation based on
I
the crowd
think,
you're selling to.
yeah, I think diversity of thought comes from diversity of age, diversity of experience, diversity of culture, whether you've worked overseas or are from overseas, all of those things are very valuable and it's the intangibles. But I will say the very hard part is how cohesive is the board as a group? Can you communicate your views effectively as a board member? How do you do that without being rude and insulting? How do you do that to still have impact when maybe it it's not a popular idea? So there's subtlety in how you form your board, and then of course this diversity of opinion I think is really helpful.
Right. And I'm sure it changes depending on which board, on how you get your influence across and how you're communicating your ideas. And so you're on the athletic board and the health aid board as well. Are you approaching those roles? They're all beverage, of course, they're in different categories, but are you approaching those roles with like a different philosophy, I guess, or is it like you have your core way of working and then you slightly adjust based on the team?
I think it's very much adjust to each situation. No company is the same. No public company is the same, and no private company is the same in spades. Like, there are so many different needs that come from, depending on the structure of the business, the shareholder ownership, again, who the PE owners are, and the style of leadership. And, is it a stable business with no acquisitions? Is it a rapidly growing business with acquisitions? Are you partnering with outside other companies? How much hiring do you need to do because of your growth? There are just so many moving parts. I've got such tremendous respect for every CEO because it really is a huge juggling act.
Yeah, and I can imagine there's also big differences between the publicly traded businesses and the private ones. And I know Celsius is public, Health-Ade and Athletic are both private, right?
Yes,
So are those? I guess what's the difference in your mindset? Is that a big differentiator in the role and the type?
yes. There's a lot more, I'll call it administration, but the first job of a board member is to represent the shareholders. And it's a huge responsibility to make sure that governance is in place, to make sure there's a successor to the CEO should anything happen. Not an easy job to find that. Very, very difficult. And usually the main purview of the governance committee, but everybody would be involved in that. But when you've got a young CEO, you're like, why would I even need to know that? But you do. That is one of your main jobs. And just to make sure that everything is above board, running well, and that is your responsibility to the shareholders. So there's a lot on that, and that is probably in spades for a public company, but you certainly feel that for all the companies that you're involved with. And then the bigger the company, public or not, but I think public you're more vulnerable, more lawsuits come at you, more HR issues, more it's just more. You become a bigger target as you become more successful. End of story.
Yeah, I heard somebody saying this the other day. Would you say it's more your role? You're representing the shareholders, of course, but you're essentially dealing with the biggest challenges and problems with the business. Would you say that's accurate?
Yes, well, ideally, a board member is supposed to be noses in and fingers out. So interested in everything, but not trying to run anything. And it is a fine line because at what point do you decide, well, I need to express my opinion on this, even though I'm not running this part of the business? So that's always a fine balance, I think. And of course, it's fun to be a board member when everything's going well. It is so much fun. And it's so hard when there are challenges. And that's your job. And of course, you can be most valuable as a board to the CEO when they can lean on you for advice. But there are times where you need to do very little because the CEO is doing such a great job.
Yeah. Well, that's the best spot to be in, and it sounds like I mean the brands that you're working on are doing excellent. Like if you look at the I don't know what the market cap was for Celsius when you joined, but it must have been much 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 lower than what it
Yeah.
is today. So, and are these the only three boards that you're a part of? Have you been a part of other ones or?
Well, I'm an advisor to Happy Dad, hard
Great
seltzer.
brand. Yep.
And then I do advisory, but in terms of formal boards, those are my formal boards, yes.
Right. And you tend to focus on, I guess, larger, more mature beverage brands. Do you have any interest in the startups, like the more emerging type brands? And that's what we do at Paperboy. We mostly talk to brands that are in that very early stage, few million in revenue. So they may not even have boards yet. It's more advisory committees. Does that world interest you, or are you only hanging with the big guys?
I love that world. I realize how incredibly hard it is. Since I moved to LA 5 years ago, because I'd been in Manhattan for 35 years and came out here, and I've been just so thrilled and impressed by all the entrepreneurs I've met. I think it's so bold and courageous to take on coming at the beverage giants and the beverage medium sizes and the beverage smalls, and there you are starting something from scratch. And it can be terribly expensive, or it can take a really long time. It's usually one of the two. Breaking through is not easy. Getting on a shelf is not easy. It's complex. So I always think, oh, it's so much easier to be an investor than to actually start one of these brands. It's really hard to do. But I love meeting founders and I spend a lot of time doing that. And that goes beyond beverages. So I'm involved with a cookie company called Toto because it's, good for better, much better for your gut. It's got some protein and, that makes a lot of sense for me. So I get very excited about that.
Yeah, I love the early stage. I've been a part of it for the past decade of my career, and I think it's the only place that I really want to be with the type of people, the energy. It's brutally difficult, but the payoff, the work is intoxicating. So it's definitely fun to be around. I know Toto in Sydney pretty well, so that's a great brand to be a part of.
Yeah, I mean, it's an astounding story. She couldn't eat traditional cookies. She loved them, and they're absolutely delicious. So, super fun.
Yeah. So, in for you, I know that you're spending most of your time with these three boards. You're doing some advisory work. Is it everything that it's pegged up to be? Do you want to be a board member for the foreseeable future? Is there something else that you have your eye on? What's next for you?
I really love the work. It's not always easy. There are moments. I mean, I hold myself to very high standards. I always want to make sure that I mean, number one thing as a board member is to act with integrity and to be trying to look around corners to assess risk and to be helpful to the management team. And so, I beat myself up sometimes. Am I doing it well enough? But I love it. I was thinking I could not go back and sit in an air conditioned office in a tower in Manhattan. I just couldn't do it anymore. I actually have decided I think it's just not even good for your health to to be breathing that air and not getting out enough. And I've always been a little bit non-traditional and like I do my business planning meetings over tea in a hotel with my team or something because I just was like, we don't have to be in the office all the time. But I started Drinks with Caroline because I had free time and I'm not used to free time. And I used to do it in person on Wall Street and bring in experts. And I just really enjoy the opportunity to access great minds. So I get a real thrill from meeting people. So I think it's a great career for someone who wants a portfolio career. I don't think it's particularly additive if you're already a very, very busy CEO. This is probably not your moment to go on a board. But if you've got a little extra time, it's really interesting. And of course, the caliber of people you're sitting in those meetings with is wonderful.
Yeah, the relationships have to be one of the best parts of that because those are some very interesting people that have done some cool things over their careers. So, and I think about it the same way of just having conversations like this on the podcast. It's just an avenue to build relationships and continue to learn and grow your career.
Yeah.
Cool. So, it's been really awesome to hear your story. I think to close, it would be helpful if, you could put yourself in the shoes of somebody who wants to make that step and get on a board and it might be a director or a VP at a brand today. What would be like the first step that you would take in order to start to make that happen?
You can volunteer to be an advisor. So, for no pay, for example, ask if you can sit in on some board meetings and offer your advice, be it financial, marketing. And, if you feel like you can't just simply say, I'm ready to be on a board, then you can prepare yourself that way. We are not clear in talking to members of this group I was talking about that getting all the credentials that you can get by taking courses, if that is particularly effective in helping you get on a board. It's a nice to have. There are all sorts of qualifications that you can take to be a board member, but you don't have to be everything. You just have to be something really helpful. And I think the marketing one is a big one. I think human resources is another one. I think being able to help bring in talent. So I'd say if there's any way you can prove yourself to a company where you're interested in being on the board by being helpful and developing a relationship with someone who's already on the board or is the CEO, CFO, it's a relationship world. We all know that. People in person getting to know you and seeing your value. That's the best advice I can give.
It's very, very strong advice. So it's basically volunteer in areas where you already have relationships and you can prove out your specific zone of expertise to start to add some value. And then eventually you'll have that as, a proof point to go and
Yeah.
sell to
And
other.
Kyle, like everything else, you grow into your role.
Right.
Day one in your first board meeting, you feel like, oh, it's supposed to have a school. I've got my little lunch pack. And you grow into it, you listen, you learn. But we all have so much to add. It's figuring out what that is, not talking too much, listening, but then realizing, gee, I really can be valuable here and adding there.
That actually brings up another good question. Has your view of joining board your core role changed over the past 5 years? Like, do you approach things much differently now?
I'm thinking about that. I think what I've learned is every single board is different, but not only that, the need on a given board is different by quarter, by year. That can change dramatically. And I think learning how to be a cooperative board member is a useful skill. Like managing that, it just takes time. You've got to be there and feel it out and make mistakes and try to get better.
Yeah, well said. Okay, well, thank you so much, Caroline. I think this was a really fun one, and it's just rare that we get to chat with people like you with your level of experience with these really incredible brands that are doing some really interesting things. So,
I truly feel honored to be in these boardrooms. Very grateful and lucky. And I literally am having the time of my life, career wise, relative to all those years on Wall Street. But it took all those years on Wall Street. So for your listeners, I think just understanding that things take time, and you build your relationships with genuine desire to be helpful, make connections, and truly, I didn't even know that John Fieldley would consider me for a board role. I had no idea that they had an opening, but I think he had found me helpful. So I think that played a role.
right. Well done. It's an incredible career, and we look forward to seeing where you take it next. Not only with the
Thanks.
board roles, but also with the podcast. So, thanks again for joining, and I'm sure we'll chat soon.
Thanks so much, Kyle.
Thank you, Caroline.